Now, I know you were not even around when the show was being produced, and that was one traumatic event in his life when he was fired from that character, but you were around when he was told he couldn't wear the mask anymore. What was that like? How did he react to that? Hello, I'm Rob Word. Welcome to a special A Word on Westerns, where we are honoring Clayton Moore, the Lone Ranger. Yeah, we love him. It's his daughter, Dawn Moore. Come on in, Dawn. Welcome.
I'll try to reveal only some dark secrets, not deep, dark secrets.
Well, it must have been exciting, but you came along later, after the show was already finished filming. Your dad did not make any more movies or TV shows after the show ended. Why was that?
He so fell in love with this character, and he said it from day one. It's funny, after I was doing some research, I came across an article in the LA Times from 1952. So he'd only been on the show for 2 years. And he said in that article, I would be honored to play this role the rest of my life. So he knew right away that it was something that really resonated with him. And he obviously was true to his word. 50 years later.
It's unusual, I think, for stars who become so identified with a role. Many times they resent it and they try to distance themselves from it. But your dad, it was the exact opposite. I think some of the Lone Ranger creed must have rubbed off on him.
I believe to have a friend, a man must be one. That all men are created equal, and everyone has the power and the right within themselves to help make this a greater world. And that God put the firewood on earth, but every man must gather and light it himself. I believe in being prepared physically, mentally, and morally, and to fight when necessary for that which is right. That this country of the people, by the people, and for the people shall live forever. And everything changes but the truth. And the truth alone lives on forever. I believe in my Creator, my country, and one thing for sure, my fellow man.
It's interesting. It was written as a Bible for the character, for the writers to always go back to in what would the Lone Ranger do? And they would go back to the creed as the template, right? And it's so timeless. I mean, it holds up today as if it was written yesterday, and it was written in 1933 by Franz Stryker. And it's pretty remarkable. But to want to rise above, just kind of improve yourself and latch on to a character who you know can better you, I think it's pretty special. And I think that the legacy of Dad doing that plays out.
Well, your dad really was special, but since the role started, the character was created, as you said, in 1933 on radio out of Chicago. The voice that was so identified with the Lone Ranger was created on the radio, and Brace Beemer's the most famous of the radio actors. He did it for years and years and years. But I've seen your dad in films prior to his being cast. He did great serials at Republic. How did he go about making his voice sound like the radio's Lone Ranger?
He actually talked into the corner of the second bedroom of their house. He would go home and practice. He already had a baritone voice to begin with. And he actually used his old prospector to answer the phone. This is the story I got told. He'd come home and talk into the corner to get his voice lower. The other interesting thing that I came upon, which we've never talked about, George Trendle, who created the character intentionally with a mask over its face so that it could always change out the actors, right? That casting of that role was crucially important that that person really embody who the fans have been listening to on the radio for the last, 10 years? More, longer.
Well, longer.
Longer.
Almost 20 years.
Exactly. There is an actual memo from George Trendle to the producer, Jack Chertok, saying, if this fellow who looks handsome enough can't get his voice to match Brace Beamer's, he's out. So Dad almost got fired before the show even aired. This memo is from 1948.
When he went in for his audition, obviously they'd seen him in The Mask and the Zorro serial. Had he then been rehearsing? Did he know it was going to be that difficult to match the voice?
I don't think that was, at the time, part of what he had to go in for. I mean, they wanted someone who was handsome, who was dashing, who could do the job, and that's another part of what's so different about those days, right? These guys, really the acting was kind of secondary. Can you fall off a rock? Can you jump on a horse? Can you do the work, right? And Dad had been a trapeze artist. He had great upper body strength. He had been a model. He knew how to pose. He knew how to hold himself. He was very gracious in how he moved and how he interacted with people. But at that interview, after Dad beat out 75 other actors, and Trendle asked him in the final interview, he said, Mr. Moore, would you like to be the Lone Ranger? My father turned to him and said, Mr. Trendle, I am the Lone Ranger.
And he is for all of us. Yeah. Let me ask about his aerialist work, because he was in such great shape throughout the Republic years of the serials, and then as the Lone Ranger, he was doing those great mounts on silver. How did he become an aerialist?
Dad and his family actually vacationed in Canada because they lived in Chicago. And his father was a very successful real estate developer. They had money. So they actually went away for the summers. And I have pictures of him as a young boy actually using the trees as apparatus to flip and climb and do what you would do on a trapeze. And he was this is so good. He was the captain of the apparatus club in high school. Of his high school yearbook that says he was the captain of the apparatus club.
These days, the captain of the apparatus club is like a problem.
Yeah, it'd be some whole other thing, I'm sure.
But it's a different era when your dad was growing up.
Or maybe not so much. It was just called something different.
So he became an aerialist?
Well, he was already doing that in high school, right? And then he became part of a troupe, the Flying Bears, Behrs, because this gentleman's first name is escaping me.
I can see him dressing up like Dancing Bear and doing some aerialist tricks. But
no, the outfit was much sexier than that. One of those 1920s tank things, right, where all their shoulders are showing and it's a tank top. And they performed in the 1932 Chicago World's Fair. So, and as a catcher, you had to be the strongest guy on the troupe to catch.
How did he go from being an aerialist and a model to a star at Republic, where he was playing good guys and bad guys almost back and forth?
Well, that's a leap from a model to a star. There is some work in between there.
To a working actor.
Okay. He was. Here's the hilarious thing. It's no different today than it was then. His mother knew someone at Columbia. Right? He had a little inside help. So he was obviously incredibly handsome and was modeling for John Robert Powers in New York. So he'd moved from Chicago to New York to model and said, I want to go to Hollywood. I want to really, I want to give this a shot. So in 1938, he moved to Los Angeles and met someone at Columbia through his mother. Didn't get the job, was really not a good actor. Actually had a test at MGM, didn't get that job either.
But he looked great.
But he looked fantastic. And so he just really was a journeyman, just started working, at whatever job he could get, to be honest. And Republic Studios, of course, was, again, looking for people who could do the work, do the job. You had to even haul the lights and haul the cables and do all that stuff. The actors were not treated like the stars that they are now. They did everything. So that was part of why he got, and he was humble. He was happy to get anything. And he said, I'm just happy to work.
He started hanging out with people like Rand Brooks and Kirby Grant, too. I know Rand, who later was Lucky on the Hoppy movies, was a close friend of Clay's.
They were friends for over 60 years, and Rand was also Charles Hamilton in Gone with the Wind. And that was 1939, so that was right when they met. They were best buddies for their entire lives.
I know Rand did a couple of episodes of The Lone Ranger also.
Yeah.
Your dad, so he got the part and he was doing great. The fans loved him. The shows, I think they must have been shooting 3 episodes a week.
Simultaneously.
Whoa.
They were shooting
like
3.
a serial. We're doing all the interiors right now for 3 episodes. And now we're going to ride around, ride that way, ride this way. And they look like it, though. The shows look like that. That they were shot in 3 days,
please
but
say the
his
actors
charisma, he and Jay Silverheels, they were just so magical on screen that when the program premiered on ABC, which was a nascent network, at the bottom, it was their top-rated show. They were running it in prime time in 1949. Pretty amazing.
There was a time, actually, when it was the only show that was on all 3 networks. It
Simultaneously?
Was simultaneously.
How did that work?
NBC Radio, it was still on the radio, and CBS Morning, and then ABC Primetime.
Wow.
That's unheard of, right? An interesting little side story about how successful they were for the studio, but not the studio, for ABC, but also for the producer. And again, so keep in mind, this is the first Western written specifically for television.
The Lone Rangers were the very first new production.
Written, right, and Dad didn't even have a television when it premiered. He had to go to his neighbor's house to watch the show.
And I heard while he was there that their TV broke down.
There was all kinds of panic at the beginning because it wasn't working, and the rabbit ears, they're doing everything they can with the rabbit ears and tinkering with it, and it barely came on right before the show started. But yeah, he didn't even have a TV, but it kind of gives you a little sense of, at the time, how infancy, it was in its infancy, but how the actors were not valued. So after a year or so of just this incredibly hard work and filming it up at Iverson's and in Chatsworth and Bronson Canyon and in the heat and the dust and all this craziness, I mean, they were changing clothes behind trees. And they didn't have dressing rooms. It was crazy. Finally, one day, Jay, who was incredibly dignified, and my father adored him, and very professional. And by the way, Jay was an established actor before he got the role of Tonto. He had been in Key Largo and many other movies. But after about a year or so of this crazy treatment, Jay said to Dad, this has got to stop. And Dad was always, go along, get along, do your job, keep your nose down, and just work. Jay did that until it became unbearable. And Jay got on Scout and took off and rode off set. Of course, it stopped production. And of course, everyone's angry, and everyone's thinking, what the hell's going on? Where'd Jay go, and why is he behaving like this? So Dad turned to the director and said, I'll go check on him and see what's going on. So Dad got on Silver, rode up. Jay's sitting up at the top of the hill, and Dad says, Jay, what's going on? And Jay says, we're not going to be treated like this anymore. We need dressing rooms. And they're not listening to us, and the only way they're going to listen to us is if we stop production. And my father said, Jay, it's kind of not right. You're costing the studio money, and it's not everybody else is being held up. And Jay said, I'm sorry, this is the only way we're going to be heard. And Dad said, you know what, you're right. And he stayed with him. And the two of them stayed on that mountaintop until the end of the day, shut the production down. What do you think was on set the next day?
Do you think that the producer's saying, he's wearing a mask, let's find somebody else to take his place, it'll be cheaper for us, and they got John Hart to do it?
Dad got fired from the show after the second season. Absolutely. The idea always was, again, that the character was created, as was the Green Hornet, which George Trendle also created. These characters that had masks over their faces so they could be easily replaced.
And they were related, too, in history.
Not in real life, but yeah. If you read, anyway.
The Lone Ranger's not real?
So, yeah, what had happened, and it's funny, because Dad wasn't a great businessman. He wanted to work. He liked people, he wanted to get along, so that was always in the forefront for him, is just get along and do the job and work. George Trendle was a genius and savvy and a barracuda. And he was on top of that merchandising before anybody knew what merchandising was about. You know, Gene Autry was a genius that way too, right? As was Roy Rogers. But they owned their own names. They were Roy Rogers and Gene Autry, and Dad was a character, so he didn't own that. He didn't make a cent off of any of that. But so George Trendle, who's so smart, and he's already doing lunchboxes and puppets and hats and children's costumes and things. I found this out years and years and years later. Somehow, Trendle thought that Dad was trying to get merchandising royalties. Dad would not even have known what that meant in those days. So he instantly went, you are nobody to us. You're out of here. The reality is the ratings started to plummet. And in fact, even though there is a mask, there was a voice and there was a presence.
John Hart always seemed a little klutzy. He'd be bumping into things, and he was a wonderful man, a nice man, but he was not Clayton Moore, and the kids knew about it. They were writing in, where's the real Lone Ranger? They had to go back and renegotiate, and they brought Clay back to the show, and well, they should have. Did his feeling for the character change when they brought him back? Because I know in between, he played bad guys in like a Gene Autry movie, and did a Wild Bill Hickok with Guy Madison, the TV shows, just to keep working. So he was still a working actor at that time without believing he was the Lone Ranger.
I think I'm not going to say there was a shift, because again, there was that interview from right away the first season when he said, I would be honored to play this the rest of my life. I mean, let's face it, he got fired. He had to work. So that role was taken by somebody else. He had to quickly move on. When he came back to the role, and there was this huge outpouring of fan love and support and ratings, right? I think he could then settle back into the fact that, and I'm not going to say he used this word, but I would say it was his calling. I think that he felt that really this role gave him a purpose. And he loved the reaction from fans. He had tremendous respect for children. He loved children. He was kind of a big kid himself. Yeah. So I think that really resonated with him. So
he was such a nice man. Now, I know you were not even around when the show was being produced, and that was one traumatic event in his life when he was fired from that character, but you were around when he was told he couldn't wear the mask anymore. What was that like? How did he react to that?
It's an interesting, again, in hindsight, it's interesting. At the time, he was hurt, for sure. But he also had no intention of discontinuing playing this role. A couple things. First of all, it was his livelihood, right? Mm-hmm. And secondly, he felt such a connection to the fans at that point that he kind of felt he was doing something for them, and that he was almost being stopped for doing something for his fans. Mm-hmm. So he went to court over it.
And we were all behind him, because I had met him. He was still wearing the mask. It was part of that show, When the West Was Fun. Mm-hmm. All the TV actors who made Westerns were there, and Clay was there in his tight outfit and mask, and it was great. And then when we were doing the Golden Boot Awards, suddenly he's wearing sunglasses because his mask was taken away, and we were all so mad and so supportive of him because that movie, The Legend of the Lone Ranger, just tanked.
It tanked.
Yeah.
It tanked.
So none of us went.
Well,
We were watching reruns on black and white.
he was on one of the cool moments from all that. That was a very difficult 5 years. It was 5 years. It started in 77, 78, and then Jack Rather died, and Benita Rather, his wife, immediately said, Clayton, I'm dropping this suit. So Benita is the one who made that happen, and she dropped it. In the interim, the thing that's really super interesting to me is he went on, anybody remember the show The Real People? Mm-hmm. George Schlatter produced. And George had Dad on in 1980, so it was right as this had begun. And he brought Dad on. There was a standing ovation, which did not ever end. They had to cut to commercial. They come back from commercial. People are still applauding and standing. Dad never did speak. He was never able to speak. All you see is him shaking hands and people being supportive. It was pretty incredible.
Yeah. Well, that was great. I remember that. And then he did get the ability to wear the mask again, but in the interim, he had had those great sunglasses designed for him. There's a big fan of The Lone Ranger and your dad. All of us are, of course, but Quentin Tarantino did a sequence that's a tribute to something that happened to you and your dad at the Spawn Ranch when the Manson family was living there. You were, 11 years old? What was that?
Dad had a friend visiting him from out of town, and this friend wanted to go see where Dad had filmed. So
this is like June of 1969?
This is the summer of 69. Mm-hmm. And I'm 11, and I have no interest in going along for this project, but it's summer, I have nothing else to do, so I tag along. And this is kind of a little critical, so I'll throw this in. So I'm in like a go-go outfit. And I bring this up because it makes us very different from how everybody else looks at this thing, right? I'm looking a little like Nancy Sinatra. And orange polka dots. Yeah.
White boots?
White, yes, the whole thing.
Yeah.
The whole thing. So we are at Iverson's Ranch. So Dad takes us to Iverson's Ranch to see the Lone Ranger rock. And we're walking around up there, and Dad says, we're really close by to Spawn Ranch, and I'm buddies with George, and I haven't seen George in 8-9 years. So why don't we just go stop over there and say hi to George while we're up here? So his buddy goes, sure. And we're in his buddy's car, which is a VW bus. So we drive over to Spawn Ranch, and I'm in my go-go outfit, and Dad's in his kind of, 1960s groovy attire, and getting out of this VW bus. And it looks like an old movie set, right? It's dusty and it's dirty and it's falling down, and there's mangy dogs kind of running around and half dead horses, and just it's a disaster. It's just, what you expect it to be, like a ghost town, like a Western ghost town. And there's a bunch of hippies and young men and women, and they see us drive up and they kind of come out, and Dad, who's super nice to everybody. Hi, I'm a friend of George's, and is he here? Yeah, he's here. What do you want? Well, I've not seen him in a while, and we were visiting, and I'd like to say hi. Well, he's kind of not available right now, and Dad goes, yeah, if he's here, I'd like to just go ahead and say hello. And he got a little pushback, but Dad doesn't take no if he wants to do something. He's not going to let that stop him. So we went into George's trailer where he was living, and it was totally dark. And Dad walks in and he says, hi, George, it's Clayton. And George goes, Clayton, is that you? And he starts to cry. And Dad, starts to talk to him a little bit because he's blind. That's why he says, Clayton, is that you? Just to ascertain what's going on here. Who are these kids, and have you let them hear Are they here because you've said okay? What's going on? I'm 11. I don't really remember all the details of the conversation. All I remember is that it smelled like old people, and it was dirty, and it was dark, and it was yucky, and I was bored, and I wanted to leave. And so, but I do know that Dad stayed for about an hour kind of talking to him. And he got the sense that George was okay. He was lonely, for sure, and that's why he got teary-eyed when he saw Dad. And he asked Dad to come back and visit him. And we left. He wasn't entirely comfortable, but he said it's not in imminent danger. Everything seems to be under control. And of course, literally 2 months later, we heard, like everybody else heard on the news, that this was about the murders and that those, in fact, were the Manson family, and that who had given us pushback to get in to see George specifically was Squeaky, because she was in charge of George. So thankfully we got out of there alive. Otherwise, Quentin would not have anything for his movie.
Well, not only is this a great sequence in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, Quentin's movie, but as a tribute to Clay, everybody's seen this film by now, I hope. As
I've seen it 4 times.
you go back into the hallway to the darkened room where George Spahn is, you don't know if he's alive or dead, you see a photo on the wall of Clayton Moore as the Lone Ranger with Jay Silverheels as Tonto. It's a great sequence in the movie, and the tension in that, it's just so well done. And obviously, QT read your dad's autobiography.
I gotta tell you, when I saw that movie for the first time, I'm sitting in the theater and I'm starting to see that scene unfurl in front of me. And I thought, this is weird, what's happening here? To see something that's only ever lived in your own memory, then on the screen happening, and it really happened almost verbatim. I was a little freaked out, but it was a fantastic scene. He did a great job.
Well, he's a brilliant filmmaker,
Yeah.
and that tension in that scene is palpable, and it was great. And Dawn, I'm glad you lived through that. I'm glad your dad did too, so that we could become friends. And I want to thank you for sharing these great memories of your dad and the Lone Ranger. Thank you.
Thank you.
Are you ready to sprint in? Oh, and before I sit down, because these pants are so tight, I wore them in honor of Clayton Moore. I don't know how he did it, but I'm just going to sit down and talk just a moment.
Nowhere in the pages of history can one find a greater champion of justice. The Lone Ranger rides again.
When they tried to resurrect the character with Clinton Spilsbury, it looked beautiful, but Clinton Spilsbury certainly didn't have the physique, nor the presence, nor the charisma of your father.
It's interesting, Robert, you brought this up, so thank you for that, because by the time you get Clinton Spilsbury, and nothing against Clinton, and Michael Horace is absolutely lovely, or Armie Hammer, who couldn't have been nicer. Of course, Johnny Depp didn't have a lot of nice things to say, but the point is, you had someone who had embraced the character, and the community, so I say that the fans, the community, bought into that. They were so invested into the character because of Clayton Moore. When the Rather Corporation came in and said, you can't go out on the road any longer and you can no longer wear the mask because we're doing this new film, the rebellion was heard across the country, it was heard worldwide. So it was a really interesting thing to see someone really embrace this character and the fans follow suit.
Well, what did your dad think when the Rather Corporation said, no, you can't wear the mask anymore?
He was hurt.
was he shocked?
He was shocked, but he was personally hurt, because the bottom line is he had been portraying this character with such sincerity and with such good faith. And let's face it, everything he was doing was furthering the Rather Corporation's, the value of that character, right? So the reality is while he was earning a living, that was his sole source of income, he also was continuing the property.
Well, he did the pizza roll commercial. He did all kinds of other things, appearances. And then once Rather took the mask away from him, Ray-Ban stepped in and designed a pair of sunglasses in the same style that the mask was.
Dad was pretty, he was pretty clever when he found those kind of ski goggle type glasses. Yeah, Corning came to him and said, "Oh, hey, you'd make a great spokesperson." So that actually wound up kind of good.
It was
that
fun.
was a good thing.
It was fun.